Gut, jetzt nimmst auf.
Nimmt auf.
Licht an.
Licht an. Affe tot, Klappe zu. Wie geht das? Klappe zu, Affe tot.
Affe tot?
Ich glaube, das haben wir irgendwann schon mal besprochen.
Nee, haben wir nicht.
Ich kann dir auch nicht so richtig sagen, was das heißt. Der Spruch ist einfach nur so wie Ende Gelände. Kennst du Ende Gelände?
Ja.
Das ist einfach so.
Wie heißt es? Affe tot?
Klappe zu. Oder andersrum. Ich bin schlecht mit Sprichwörtern.
Okay. Jedenfalls
zu,
etwas
tot.
mit Affe.
Ich glaube, Klappe zu, Affe tot.
Klappe zu, Affe tot.
Gut. Also, dann...
Did you get that? I'm so...
Also ich verstehe nur Bahnhof. You only understand train station? It's all Greek to me.
Understanding Train Station. Living Between Cultures with Josh and Phelan.
Well, welcome back, everyone.
Welcome back to episode 3. And even though we announced that this episode was going to be something different...
Surprise! It's not.
It's not that, because for reasons that I think we can't really talk about now.
Yeah, we'll talk about it in the future.
Yeah, we'll have to delay that episode. So if you were hoping to hear a third voice today, we have to disappoint you. It's just the two of us again.
Yeah, you'll have to wait a little longer, but hopefully here in the near future we can bring that episode out.
Yeah.
And you guys will get to hear a little bit more about work culture in Germany and the US and kind of the differences. But we're looking forward to bringing that episode out. But at this point, we decided that we're going to talk about a different topic today.
Yeah, different topic.
So I think yesterday we had kind of a planning meeting and we were trying to figure out what would make sense for a good episode to follow on the two that you guys have heard so far. And we were kind of struggling, trying to come up with what really would fit well with the flow that we've had so far. And I was sitting in my living room, and in my living room I had I don't even know what you call it in English.
Drying rack?
Yeah, a drying rack essentially, which is... People in the U.S. have drying racks, but not like in Germany.
Yeah, Wäscheständer in German. That's
exactly. And I actually have one from IKEA. So it's more like the German one where it opens up and it has the two arms and then the long spaces in between to hang up lots of clothes. And it got me thinking, maybe talking about some household differences, not only objects, but also just household habits.
Yeah.
Would be an interesting topic.
So that's what we're talking about today. We definitely thought that after those two, like, a little bit broader topics, it would be cool to have a more, more specific topic, I guess, to talk about today.
Kind of zero in on a specific topic.
Exactly. So that's going to be the topic for today, and I think there's a lot to talk about, so we'll see how long it's going to be. But also, I would like to say that this is the first episode that we're recording since the launch. So the first two episodes were both pre-recorded, and so was the third episode that was supposed to be the third episode that now isn't the third episode anymore. But just as an explanation, so this is the first episode we're recording ever since we actually got to see everyone's reactions.
And get all of your wonderful feedback.
Yeah, so we were really, really positively surprised by
I would say we were very surprised.
Yes, by all the positive feedback. I mean, we were hoping that you guys would like it, but we didn't really think that people would like it that much just from the first episode. Because, I mean, the first episode was just such a broad intro that I guess we didn't really expect that to be as successful as it is.
Yeah, for sure. So we'll see how people react to the second episode because that hasn't posted quite yet.
Yeah.
But the feedback that we've gotten has been great so far, and we really appreciate that. Just for you guys who are not watching on YouTube, we have a YouTube channel as well that we just kind of set up. So when we're recording, we just kind of videotape what we're doing, and we took some of your feedback and we've tried out a different constellation kind of setup here. So. Yeah. We're trying to figure out how it fits with the conversation, if it affects the flow of our conversation, because we're kind of next to each other as opposed to looking at each other.
Yeah, because most people said that they would like to see our facial expressions more, which, I mean, thanks, guys, for the compliment that you want to see our faces more. So now we're trying that out, so let us know in the comments below how you like it, because I also know that a lot of people complimented, especially you, Josh, but also some people complimented me on my legs and your legs. Like, people,
I think that was one of the most, the top comments.
Yeah, like people really liked seeing us as whole people, like our whole bodies, which now we went back to not being really able to show that because now we're behind the desk and then we have our laptops set up in front of us for the recording and for notes and stuff like that. So let us know how you like the setup, and also people who are just listening, let us know if you can tell any difference.
Exactly.
Or if you can.
I was just going to say, although we have the YouTube channel going, the main focus is this is a podcast for us. So we don't want the conversation to suffer by what we're trying to also get recorded on the camera. So
Yeah.
let us know if you guys feel like the conversation has been affected somewhat, and we're pretty self-critical anyway, so we'll analyze it ourselves. But
Yeah, I don't really want to interact with the camera too
Not
much.
too
And that's a
much.
lot of people, like, I think wanted us to do that. And that's not really the goal for us, at least. Like, we really want to interact with each other more than with the camera.
yeah.
But yeah, also just one last point to like all the feedback that we got from you guys. We also got so many emails and
my
just
gosh.
DMs on Instagram and stuff like that. A few people also already jumped on Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee and supported
thank
us
you so
there.
much.
Thank you so much for the support. We are going to record a little extra snippet for all our patrons after we are done with the official episode. So yeah, we were very overwhelmed by all
Yeah, and
the
I was just going to
emails.
say, please have some patience
Yes.
in our responses, because I have a full-time job and Feli has her whole YouTube channel that
Yeah.
she does. So we have read most of the emails and most of the responses, but it's going to take some time for us to be able to answer everything. But we really appreciate you guys reaching out and giving us your thoughts.
Yeah, and also like topic ideas and
Yeah.
people who offered to join us on the podcast
Mm-hmm.
because they have some interesting stories to share. So I think that's like really interesting. That's kind of what we were going for, to like have a international community and
Definitely.
include the audience.
And I think that's one thing that's been interesting for us to also see is in the analytics in the website that we see use for the podcast, we can see where you all are listening from.
Yeah.
And we've been really surprised by the far reach already just after one episode. But I guess that's technology for you.
Yeah, it's crazy. I didn't even count, but the list was so long. Like, I mean, down in the list, there were like countries that I hadn't even heard of,
Yeah.
which I think kind of just like shows how poor my geography knowledge is. But we have like one listener from like this one country somewhere
I think
in the Caribbean.
we had someone in Aruba.
Yeah.
Yeah, someone in Aruba was listening to us. So thanks for taking us to the Caribbean.
Yeah.
We're there in spirit, even
Yeah.
though we're here in cold Ohio.
Greetings to all the places that people are listening from. And I guess like with that, let's not talk too much.
Yeah, let's go ahead and
den
jump into
heißen
the...
Brei herum.
Yeah,
Is
let's
there a
not
saying
beat
for it?
around the bush.
Yeah. And just like jump into the topic. So houses are a pretty essential topic, especially when you move abroad, but also when you visit, depending on like how you travel. Even in hotels, you can see a bunch of the
Yeah.
differences, but especially if you like stay with, at an Airbnb or with a host family or friends or family or something like that, you will probably notice these differences right when you arrive. And the
Definitely.
first night, probably. And we are now specifically talking about Germany and the US
Exactly.
once again. And I also don't even think we could fit any other countries
I don't,
in this episode.
and I don't have enough experience in other countries to really
Yeah.
be able to go in detail about this. But that's one thing that I always tell people when they talk about travel is, what's the best way to do it? Do you want to stay in Airbnbs? Do you want to stay in hotels? And I always say, if it's possible, stay with the locals
Yeah.
or something that's close to like a home, because that's really when you're going to get the most authentic cultural experience.
Yeah.
And that has to do with the way that some of the architecture is set up. So I think kind of the way that we want to structure this episode is, we thought we'd kind of give you guys a audio tour of a house. So we'll kind of walk through the different rooms of a house. And I think throughout the world, most of the rooms are the same, but we'll talk about some of the smaller physical differences that there are between houses in the US and houses in Germany.
Yeah.
And then we'll probably move on into talking about some of the habits that are different. So how people use homes and the spaces there.
Yeah, so basically, like, I think the first part is really just kind of to go through the whole house and just point out all these like hard facts and just the differences. Some of you guys listening might know about these differences, so in that case, I'm going to put the timestamps in the video description and the podcast description. So in case you want to skip that part, I mean, of course, we're like going to present it in a, entertaining way, as we are. But if you want to skip that and want to go to the household habits, which I personally think is a very interesting topic, because
Yeah.
I haven't personally talked about that on my YouTube channel. And I think that's going to be the part where we'll be able to tell a little bit more stories and stuff like that. But yeah, let's just...
Hauen wir die Fakten raus, ne?
Let's jump into the house tour. So let's imagine that we're standing in front of a house, and I guess in my imagination, I'm standing in front of an American house right now.
That's funny, because I was in front of a German
Of
house.
course you were. So let me start with what I'm seeing. So an American house from the outside, a typical, like, of course, every home is different and apartments are a whole different thing too, of course, but stereotypical American house will have a porch. It'll have a front yard without any kind of fence or hedge. It's just open. And then it'll have a driveway, probably with a garage attached to it too. So,
and I would say that's most suburban houses.
but even like in the city, whenever there are,
you're right.
you know, when there's space at least, like even here where I live, which is rather a crowded area in the city, we have garages, but I've lived in other places that had a driveway at least. Like the house next to me has a driveway. And we do have some kind of front yard. It's not as nice as the ones in the suburbs, but and we have a porch. So
not necessarily the white fences here in the city, but out in the suburbs you definitely see kind of that's the American
white
house.
Fences?
Yeah, I mean that's kind of part of the American dream, if you will, is the white picket fence. But in reality you don't really see too much of that.
Yeah, like to me it's I know what you're
Maybe
talking
in the backyard.
about. Yeah, but I'd say like the typical American house doesn't even have a fence. Like
No,
that's
you're
what's
right.
typical to us, that there's no boundaries really. Like there's no hedges or fences. Like it's really hard to tell where the one yard ends and the other yard starts.
I know that at least in my neighborhood where I grew up, it was mostly just by the grading or the way that they molded or built the hill with the dirt. That kind of showed like a somewhat separation, but you're right. I mean, we would always play in the neighbor's yard, and if there were kids that lived next to us, so we were always back and forth between each other's yard. But yeah, that's very typical of an American front yard, is you have a big front yard, a decent sized driveway, and oftentimes a garage, but not always, and the front porch.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one thing to that. Because I think that the whole layout of the house already speaks or says so much about the culture differences, that like how Americans are a little bit more open and Germans are a little bit more reserved and like private. And I think like you can see that just by looking at how houses are set up.
Yeah, just neighborhoods in general.
Yeah.
There's not the clear differentiation like you have in Germany between
like,
this is my property and this is the property line. I'm getting out my tape measure to make sure that every single square centimeter is accounted for.
Yep. And you better not have your branch from your tree on your side of the yard grow over into like my space of my yard, because there's actual Nachbarschaftsstreits, so
neighborhood disputes,
and they even often go to court.
That happens here in the U.S. too.
But
though.
I feel like it's,
in general we're pretty open, but we can get pretty petty when it comes to that stuff.
Okay, maybe I'm not sure if there really is a big difference there, but in my mind I would say that that's a more typical German thing, like the grumpy German.
Yeah. No, I would for the most part agree with that. But I think that's a good analogy of the open yard, kind of talks about the general openness that Americans tend to have.
Like welcoming and
Yeah, I guess more welcoming, because Germans tend to be pretty open as well, but when it comes to property, they're very
and also just like with approaching people and those kind of things. But yeah, from there, I guess we'll move into the house.
Well, maybe let's just talk a little bit more about the front of a German house.
Oh, sorry. Yes,
you're fine.
Of course.
So a German house tends to be closer to the street than an American house is. So you don't have these big front yards, and then also I feel like they oftentimes do have driveways. And correct me if I'm wrong, Feli, but there's normally a fence or some sort of partition, a gate. And I was just thinking, pretty much everywhere in neighborhoods you always see Ausfahrt or Einfahrt frei halten, which is keep the gate or the entranceway clear, because people I guess will park in front of you if you don't have that, so you can't get into your property. Yeah. But it's very common to have a fence or some sort of hedge in the front that makes a clear differentiation between the sidewalk and your property, and it's very also clear where your property ends and your neighbor's property begins.
Yeah, and Germans also like their privacy, so like in a lot of cases the hedges, if there is one, are going to be like really high and you won't really be able to see the house sometimes at all. And like,
go ahead.
Sorry, not all German houses do even have a driveway or a garage. That's like another thing, especially in cities. I mean, it's different in the suburbs, but we just don't have a lot of space in Germany in general. So like if you have a driveway and a garage and some kind of like front yard, you're living in luxury.
Oh yeah, for sure. I can think of one of my friends' homes. They have like their street is extremely small in the first place, and then it branches off into 4 different houses, and it's like on the same lot size that a normal suburban house would be here in the U.S. pretty much.
That's crazy. And also like we don't even have suburbs like you guys do in the U.S. I think there's like a whole historical story to that, like how suburbs even developed in the U.S. But a typical suburb in the U.S. has these streets that are all dead ends, and a lot of the houses will basically be the same houses, like I don't know how many, like 20 or 50 houses on different streets, and they all look the same and have the same layout, or I guess
Exactly,
there's a different...
yeah. They're oftentimes, the builder will buy a large lot of land and then break that lot up into smaller lots, and then they'll have, like, we'll say 4 or 5 different types of houses or designs of houses that they'll build.
There is some variety, but not a whole lot.
And they just kind of intersperse them throughout the neighborhood. So in this, like, my grandparents had the same exact house layout as my next door neighbors, and we all lived in the same neighborhood, but they were a couple houses away. So I was like, oh, so this is this person's bedroom, but at my grandparents' house, this is a TV room.
Right. And I mean, we do have that in Germany sometimes, but it's not very common, and we definitely don't have the whole like dead end thing, like where the streets really only lead to houses.
Have you heard the word cul-de-sac? Okay, yeah, that's
Is that what they're called?
I'd say that's more of a common word that we use in the U.S. instead of dead end.
Yeah.
You're talking about a Sackgasse, right?
Yeah, I mean, but they are, right?
They are a dead end. I just brought that up because I was talking with one of my Mexican coworkers about this exact topic the other day, and he asked, "What's a cul-de-sac?" Don't ask me where it comes from. It sounds French to me, but it's essentially the dead end. But
it sounds French to me. It sounds like an idiom.
yeah, it's Greek to me. But no, the cul-de-sac is very much a place where like kids will play out in the street. Like you grow up. The houses that are on the cul-de-sac, on the actual like circle at the dead end, tend to be worth a little more than the ones on the street themselves, because it's like prime property.
Yeah, but like basically all of these streets are kind of a very long driveway to all these houses, and only the people who live there or visiting the people living there will be on the streets.
Yeah. Well, let's get back to the actual house itself, because now we're wandering into
of course
the
this
neighborhood.
is going to happen.
The neighborhood.
I think our audience hopefully appreciates that though a little bit.
But yeah, so now we've talked about the front yard in Germany, or the front of the house in Germany and in the US.
There's usually no porches. I don't think I've seen a lot of houses in Germany with a porch. It's usually just like some kind of stairs leading up to the door. Yeah. And
it's a pretty quick transition from the street into the house.
Yeah, and there's no like typical layout as to how the front of a house looks like. Like it varies a lot, I'd say. But yeah, then you enter. And the first thing that's different is the front door. At many American houses, you can just open the front door, and this is for apartments and also for houses. You can open the front door just like you can open a door within the house without a key unless it's locked, because in the US, usually the front doors just have regular doorknobs.
Yeah, you don't... How do you explain that? That's a difficult thing to explain. But in Germany, you need a key to get in the house.
Yeah, so there's not even doorknob outside. There's no doorknob or door handle outside. There's just some kind of...
It's a fixed doorknob, if you will, or more fixed door handle.
Basically just to push the door
open. It's like a paddle
open.
that you push.
Yeah.
But it doesn't move itself, it moves the whole door. So essentially you have to put the key in the door, and then you push the door itself to get in.
Exactly.
So here in the US, if you leave your front door unlocked, anyone can open the door and walk in.
And just walk in. Like that's what you
Most
did today.
Most of the time. Yeah, that's what I did today.
Like you just text me like, hey, I'm here, and I'm like upstairs in my office where we're recording right now, which is on the 3rd floor. And you just text me, and I go downstairs, and you were already in because the door was unlocked.
Yeah,
and I think
maybe that was a little presumptuous of me.
No, I mean, you're always welcome to come in here, but I think many Germans do know this from like a bunch of American shows, and like all these sitcoms like Friends or How I Met Your Mother or Full House, or I don't know if I can think of any other sitcoms.
Yeah, where just random friends will show up and walk in the house.
They just walk in, and I think many Germans always think it's really unrealistic, but in the US, it's really not.
Yeah, like did you ever watch Everybody Loves Raymond? Mm-mm. Okay, well that's like a typical like 90s sitcom, and the in-laws live like across the street, and they always just show up in the house and just walk in. Yeah. But that's funny, I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah.
And that must be in Germany a much bigger topic of like, it's a big deal if you forget your key when you leave the house then.
Yeah, you're locked out.
Because I've gotten locked out of my house before, but that's an even bigger
that's a
deal.
thing like at houses and also apartments. Like I think almost every German has either done that before in their lives or know someone who's done that before. Like I've definitely done it at least once, where I actually had to have the locksmith come.
Yeah.
But like at my parents' house, like we have several doors where you can enter the house. But at my apartment back in Munich, it happened to me. Like the thing is, you can't let the door shut unless you have the key with you, because if you don't even need to actively lock it, like usually what happens to people is they leave their house in the morning, they close the door, they want to lock the door actively because like it's already kind of locked when you close it, but then Germans love security, like or safety, we lock it on top of that. So then you like want to lock it and you're like damn, I don't have my keys.
But now we've continued to wander off again because I was just thinking, and the keys are different.
Keys are a little bit different. I think we don't necessarily have to go into detail
No,
there.
we can talk about that another time because it is interesting. It took me, I had to ask for help the first time.
Oh, really?
Yeah, in my
I
dream
had
apartment.
to. Yeah, I didn't understand how the keys worked either.
Maybe we should talk about it then.
Okay, so for me, let me tell my story very quick.
Yeah.
So in the US, when you unlock the door, you put your key in, you turn it all the way around to the right,
Mm-hmm.
and then you basically turn it back until it's like in a straight position again.
To get the key
and
out.
then you pull it out. Yeah. And in Germany, it works differently. Do you want to explain how it works?
Well,
in Germany?
I feel like in Germany there are a couple different ways that you can set up your door, and maybe I'll learn something from talking about this with you. But first of all, the key goes in upside down for me. So the prongs, like the squiggly part of the key here in the U.S. faces up when you put it in almost always.
Oh, I never even paid attention
And
to that.
in Germany, it tends to face down.
Usually, yeah.
Yeah. So the way that I opened my door in Germany most of the time, I feel like, was I would put the key in and I would turn it to the left, so counterclockwise, and that would allow me to push the door open.
Okay.
And then if I wanted to lock it, I had to turn it all the way. Like if I wanted to do a secure lock, I would have to turn it all the way clockwise, if I'm correct. Or is that
I guess
wrong?
I think doors are, they can close on the left side and on the right side. I think the
Yeah,
counterclockwise
yeah.
is what we both said doesn't really make sense. I guess what you're trying to say is you're turning it away from the wall, right, to open it.
No, I was actually thinking turning it towards the wall.
Towards the wall to open it?
Yeah.
Oh, that's an interesting door. See, that's not what I'm used to in Germany.
Oh, yeah. Well, as you can see, in each
They're
country,
different.
there are lots of differences between the doors themselves. But I thought specifically it was interesting that in the U.S., the squiggles on the key the teeth of the key are facing up, and in Germany, they face down.
Yeah, for my door at my parents' place, it's like horizontal, how we put the key in.
Oh, okay.
Because
Interesting.
then, there's also another thing about locks. So I guess this is like a little tip for all people moving to Germany or visiting Germany. Because of the whole thing that you can't open the door without a key, for most locks, you need to make sure that you don't have a key stuck inside. Because, in the US, usually when you lock your door from the inside, you don't even need a key to lock it, but you
Yeah.
have these little turn
Like
thingies.
a built-in key, essentially.
Kind of like we have in Germany at the bathroom doors. But in Germany, when you want to lock your front door, you need to do it with a key. So like many people have a key stuck inside
Yeah.
at all times to
Yeah.
just like always lock it and unlock it. The thing is, a lot of the locks can only have one key inserted. So if you have a key stuck inside and you forget about it, and then you bring your other key and go to work, and then you come back, you might not be able to insert your key because the other one's stuck on the inside, and then you're also screwed.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
That's a good tip.
But some locks are different. Some locks are smarter than that, and so
Yeah.
my parents' lock is like that, and I think it's a special lock, and that's why
Yeah.
you insert the key horizontal.
I feel like the locks in Germany in general tend to be pretty special because, like, at least for my apartment building, I only had one key for my apartment and for the building, and my one key would open the front door to the building and also my unit.
Yeah.
And here in the U.S., that doesn't tend to happen very often, at least in my experience.
But I also feel like the keys that I see in the U.S., they're all very simple keys.
Yeah.
And the keys in Germany are often like these, I don't know, like high-tech security keys
Yeah.
with like all these different layers to them.
It's a huge deal if you lose your key then in Germany, then I
Yeah.
guess, because it would be expensive to get it
It's
replaced.
also hard sometimes to copy them because
Yeah.
they're like
So
3D.
intricate. Yeah. So once we figured out the locks and been able to get into the front door, into the house.
Yeah,
we
we're
made
like
it into
20
that.
minutes into the podcast. We're not even inside the house, but bunch of culture shocks.
Yeah. So once you've finally figured out how to open the door, you've figured out the lock, made sure you had the right key, turned it the right way.
Yep.
In the U.S., you just kind of tend to walk straight into the house oftentimes.
Right.
It depends on the design of the house and how old the house is. There are so many variables in this discussion. But in general, you just kind of walk straight in, and
Yep.
oftentimes it's a pretty open concept.
Yeah, like in a lot of cases, especially for apartments, I feel like, but also some houses, you'll just be right in the living room or some kind of living room-like area.
Yeah.
And in Germany, that is not the case. Usually in Germany, you're just in this little foyer. Is that how you say it?
The very American way of saying it is foyer.
Foyer.
But in other parts of the English-speaking world, they would say foyer.
Okay, in German we would say Diele, or foyer is also a word that we wouldn't really use for regular houses. But you'll find yourself in a very, like a little entrance room pretty much, or it might also be connected to the hallway already, depending on the building. But usually you'll find yourself in an area where people leave their shoes, you have like the wardrobe for your jackets and stuff like that, and you're not exactly inside the house yet, and in a lot of cases this little room even has a door, so it's
it's
closed
completely closed off from the rest of the house oftentimes, which is nice in the winter because then it keeps the cold air out.
Exactly. I think that's also part of why it is like that.
Now, is it common oftentimes to have a bathroom directly off of that?
Yeah, like we always call it Gästebad or Gäste-WC. Yeah. So usually, I think even, I mean, not so much in apartments, but at houses, I would say to this day, even modern houses usually have the bathroom right there, right in that area.
Now, some people in the U.S. would call that a mud room.
Okay.
So like in my parents' house, it's not completely blocked off, but oftentimes when you walk through the garage, which is a very common thing to do in the U.S. because you
and that's
park
crazy.
in the garage.
That's not a
and
thing
then-
in Germany.
Yeah, you park in the garage oftentimes, and then you go through the garage door, not the front door.
Yeah, which is like we usually, even if people have garages at their homes, it's not very common, or at least I don't even think I've ever seen it, that the garage is connected to the house.
Yeah.
It's usually a separate thing outside of the house. There's no door that connects to the house. In the US, it often does.
Yeah, it's
people
an
oftentimes
integral part
also
of the
have
house.
like fridges in there or like their, storage.
So yeah, if one huge American fridge isn't enough for your house, you oftentimes put another one in the garage, and people will cycle through them. So like the one that was in the house, when it starts to get old, they'll put it in the garage.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So my grandparents have two. My family is a pretty big culprit of this. My parents have a refrigerator in the house and in the garage, and so do my grandparents as well.
crazy.
And both, it's just the two of them that live in the house.
Die spinnen, die Amis. That's what Germans say in a kind of like sarcastic, sometimes a little bit arrogant way, but I think usually just
Those crazy
sarcastic.
Americans.
Yeah, they're crazy, those
Yeah.
Americans.
But yeah, so we're in this mud room essentially, which is just a space, like you said, where you keep your jackets and your shoes.
Yeah.
And oftentimes there's a small bathroom for guests that's connected to that. And then we walk through the second door, and then you're actually into the house oftentimes in Germany.
And in Germany, there's usually always some kind of hallway, especially if it's a house with different stories, then the stairs are probably going to be there, and there's going to be different doors that lead to the different rooms, because the living room and also the kitchen in most German homes are their own rooms with doors that can be completely closed off.
In comparison to the American, I have to say, I'm talking mostly about more modern homes in the U.S. now, but there's like this big craze of open concept, which means essentially you don't have clearly defined rooms, but rather just spaces in an open area.
Yeah. So usually the living room doesn't really have doors. The kitchen usually doesn't have doors, at least at most places that I've seen. Or if they are in like their own room, kind of, it's still more open than what I know from Germany. Like in a lot of cases, there is some kind of door, but there's no actual door in there, if that makes sense. It's more like an arch.
There's like a door, there's like a door frame, but not the actual door
Yeah.
itself. Yeah, I would agree. I would say that's a pretty
So
pretty
everything's
common
just a little
occurrence.
more open, and the living room is kind of the center of the home, which, I mean, of course it kind of is to Germans too, but I think living rooms in Germany are considered a little more private and like the place where you wie sagt man, sich zurückziehen.
Where you retreat to, essentially.
So you don't really want people to just walk into the house and be in the middle of the living room, because that's where you relax.
It's like the surprise at the end, right?
What do you mean?
In the sense of you walk into the house, this is like the normal space,
Oh,
and then it's a privilege to be able to go into the living room a bit more.
Germans
I
would say
agree with
it's ungemütlich if
Yeah.
people from the outside just like always walk right into your living room.
They need a bit of a transition from the outside into
Exactly.
something that's so personal.
Exactly. We like to have different spaces for different purposes.
Yes. And I think the fact that the rooms are so clearly defined and have doors also has to do something with the fact that in Germany there oftentimes isn't any air conditioning, and the houses are designed in a way to be much more energy efficient compared with the US. So
Absolutely.
you want to be able to close the door to be able to keep the heat in or keep the cold air in, as opposed to in the American open concept layout where it's all just one room and it's not necessarily very energy efficient.
A lot of Germans also don't really love it when you cook in the kitchen and then you can smell that through the entire house. Like we like to close the kitchen doors and then open the window.
Interesting.
Not everyone, of course, but a lot of people are like that.
I mean, it makes sense.
Yeah.
But then you don't get to smell the great stuff that's about to be cooked.
I mean, you can still smell it. It's just like if you if you cook something that smells very
Lots of garlic.
intensely, then you don't have to have that in your bedroom or living room necessarily. Okay, so besides the room difference or the layout difference, we talked about the energy efficiency.
Yeah.
And there is a pretty big difference there regarding the walls on the one hand, and then the way that people heat and cool their places down. Do you want to
Yeah, well, I
jump
think
into
so.
that?
Yeah.
I'm throwing you the ball.
In my experiences, Germans tend to make fun of American homes. They think that they're very flimsy because we tend to make our homes out of wood and drywall. In Germany, it tends to be more out of brick and stone and much sturdier materials.
Yeah,
so,
and I guess concrete.
Concrete, exactly. So American homes, the walls tend to be made out of wooden studs, is what they're called, which is just the general frame of the home. And then you put drywall on top of that, which is just kind of, it's not quite cardboard, it's stronger than cardboard, but it's still a relatively weak material. Yeah. So it's very easy to break that. So you have to be careful when you're around walls because if something falls into the wall, it could break it. Or if people get upset and they hit the wall, it's very common to see in American movies that someone punches through the wall.
Yeah, and I just posted something on my Instagram story the other day, which was like a video of exactly that happening, where a girl punched the wall and it left a pretty big hole in the wall. And some Germans messaged me and asked, "Wait, is that real?" I think they all thought that it wasn't real, like it's just a thing
like
in the movies.
movie,
But no, like I've witnessed it. Like I've been there, and like even here at my house, like. Not because someone punched the wall, but because, someone was moving in and had their whatever bed or something.
And a corner punches through the wall.
It would leave a hole, And also, unfortunately, because of that, you can hear a lot through American walls. Like, American walls are very thin, at least, I'm not sure if they're actually thinner than German walls, but they feel very, very thin because you can hear a lot from room to room and even from the outside. Like, even if you have good windows, you can usually, at most American places, in my experience, you can hear people from the streets, you can hear the cars through the walls. So that's something that Germans don't really love.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. And I mean, talking about the German walls, then you can't punch through a German wall.
No, oh my God, please don't try. I mean, I'm sure there is some drywalls every now and then.
You have to have proper anger management.
You're going to break your hand. People also made fun and assumed that that's the real way how I broke my wrist. That I tried to punch a German wall and forgot that I can't do that in Germany.
That's funny.
But no, guys, I wasn't even in Germany. I broke it in the US, and that's not how it happened.
But yeah, you can hear a lot more through the walls. They're not I would say they're probably not quite as well insulated.
No, they're definitely not.
So the rooms don't hold the heat as well,
especially
in
these
these older homes.
If you can hear, like if acoustics go through, then air goes
Acoustics.
through. What did I say?
Acoustics.
Oh, I meant to say that was just an accident. Yeah, if acoustics. That's what I said. Yeah, if acoustics can. Now I can't say it. No, you totally threw
Sorry,
me
I
off.
shouldn't have said anything.
No, that's that was just an accident. If acoustics go through, then air goes through too usually. Yeah. So that in my opinion, American houses are pretty poorly insulated, but I've also never lived in a super expensive and new home. So
yeah, most of your experience is more in older homes, like next to universities where students live. But I would say the same rings true for more modern homes as well. Probably a little better than these older homes, but in general, the walls are pretty thin and not as well insulated.
Yeah, but so the big difference now that we wanted to talk about is heating and cooling things down. So Americans love air conditioning, which I think most listeners probably know that. And so most homes that I've been in, I've also been in one other home that was different, but most homes will have central air conditioning, which means that you'll have these famous air vents throughout the house that like most Germans know from like movies, especially when kids want to play a prank and then they climb through the air shafts. Which I think is not even very realistic that you can actually climb through them.
In homes, I would say no, but in bigger public buildings, you could.
In commercial buildings or something like that. Yeah, so like those things, like in the house that we're in right now, we have air shafts here, and then we have like these little air vents in every room where the air comes out. And the interesting thing to Germans is that this is the way that Americans like to cool their houses down. This is also the way that Americans heat their homes. And it's also, to a certain extent, the way that Americans air out their homes. Or not air out, but like the way that they have ventilation in their homes, whereas Germans love to open their windows, which is not really a thing in the US so much, but I think we'll talk about that later with the household habits.
When we get into household habits, exactly.
But the whole like air conditioning thing is a huge difference. And as I said, the central air conditioning, you won't find that at every house, especially older houses don't have that. But most places will, if they don't have central air conditioning, so with the air shafts, they will at least have some kind of like AC window units.
Yeah, like a unit I've seen them in the ceiling sometimes as well in more like office buildings.
Yeah, so just like individual air conditioning units.
Which you
in
have
the
to have
rooms.
like a remote control for sometimes, or just on the actual operator panel,
And then like in those cases, you will also, for heating, then oftentimes find radiators in American homes, but not so much.
I was just going to say radiators in American homes isn't quite as common, mostly in older homes.
No, but what I meant to say is like whenever they don't have central air conditioning, then they need to have some way to heat, and then in those cases they do have radiators.
Yeah.
But usually you won't really see them a lot. I've seen them in like a couple places around.
Yeah.
Like old places.
Exactly. I was going to say I think the only place I've ever really seen radiators is in really quote unquote really old homes. An old home to an American is a young home to most German buildings.
And in Germany, that's the standard way of how we heat.
So in Germany, I actually don't have much experience with that in Germany because I haven't lived there in the winter.
Yeah.
So I don't. That's interesting to hear you say. I know that there's the radiator, and then oftentimes people will just have like at least in my experience, I've seen a lot of just fireplaces in the living room, like a wooden fireplace that can help to heat up the place as well.
I would say fireplaces are not very common anymore.
I guess
in
fireplace isn't really the
Kachelofen is what you mean, but that also is like pretty old fashioned.
To explain what that is in English, it's like what do we say in English? A wooden stove, a wooden stove, I think is what we would say in English.
Yeah. I would not say that that's a very typical way of heating in Germany. That's an old-fashioned way, and it's becoming trendy again. Like people...
I think it's more for the optics of it and the way that it
like
looks,
the
the
coziness,
aesthetics.
but it's you need to be able to afford that and have the space for that. But the traditional way of heating in Germany is really just radiators. You have them in every room, and depending on the building that you're in, they will be all connected to one kind of
general...
What's it called?
Thermostat.
Thermostat, or you can change the temperature in every room. And you'll also find them in commercial buildings as well, like at schools, offices. There will be radiators usually. And then a lot of people also have the Bodenheizung, so the
That was one thing that I thought was really cool
it's
in Germany.
awesome.
Yeah,
Does nobody have that
I've never
in the
seen
US?
that in the US.
See, that
it probably
surprises me.
exists, but I'm not bougie enough to be in those type of homes.
Because that's the best. I mean, a heated floor.
Oh, you come in from the winter or I was there in the fall, and it's cold enough in Germany in the fall, and you walk in and the floor is warm.
Yeah.
It's the
awesome.
best. Or like if you have to get out of bed in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom.
Yeah, and in the bathroom, it's the best to have it in the bathroom. Because you're cold, you don't want to get into the shower, but then at least the floor is nice and warm.
No, that's definitely one of the best things about German homes, in my opinion, besides
absolutely.
the windows.
Well, about the AC, we don't really have AC in Germany. So... yeah, if it's hot in the summer, and it does get hot, not as much, of course, as in the south of the U.S., but yeah, you just suffer, and you just open your windows, which is something that we'll get to in a second.
But I have to say, my experience in Germany, it obviously gets hot, but it's not quite as long of a summer as it is in the U.S. So you just really have to suffer for maybe a couple weeks, and then you get through it.
Yeah. But Germans complain, even if it's just a couple weeks, or I think these past 2 summers there were heat waves that lasted a month or so. And then Germans complain about that. And they do suffer because there is no air conditioning at most places. Like some commercial buildings will have air conditioning, but at homes it's very, very uncommon. So then you just need to open your windows at night. You need to be strategic with your blinds throughout the day with ventilating and stuff like that. Germans know
you have
all
to have
the
a
tricks.
strategy.
Yeah.
Americans can't imagine living without their AC. I think that is one of the biggest shocks when Americans hear how life is in Germany. When they hear that there's no AC, we really can't in general conceptualize what life is without AC. And oftentimes here in the US, AC is everywhere, not just in homes, but everywhere.
Yeah.
The grocery store, all restaurants. In the summer, you almost always have to have a jacket with you when you're going out.
Always.
Because
I even wore
it'll
long
be very, very
pants.
hot outside, very humid. You're sweating outside, and then you walk inside and you're hit with all of this cold air, and you're freezing. Oftentimes because you were just sweating before, and now it's all starting to. I mean, that's the point of sweating, but that's why you have to have a jacket with you all the time, or just a fleece. I don't know, like a sweater or a sweatshirt, just to stay warm.
Yeah, it's crazy. And to all Germans, I
not energy
thought that in
efficient.
the beginning, and I still think that to this day. And I know most Germans Germans think that way, and most Europeans do, that Americans totally overdo it with the AC because you shouldn't be freezing inside. You should be comfortable inside and not sweating. You should not be cold inside. That is not really the point, but that's what Americans do.
Oh, yeah.
And this is also something that a lot of Americans don't believe, but I'm telling you it's true.
That you get sick?
You do get sick. It's also, I can prove it to you. I just saw...
Did you research it?
Yeah.
Because
like the other day I saw something on Instagram, but I can also research it. But Americans like to believe that AC does not make you sick, but it does because it dries out your membranes and everything, and it also dries out the air, and all those conditions make it easier for
you more susceptible to getting sick.
to get sick. And I was sick, and a lot of other Germans have the same experiences all the time when I first came here. I came to the US in the summer, in August, and I was sick for pretty much just weeks straight. And every time I came back after that from Germany, I got sick. But over time, I must have somehow gotten used to it because now I don't get sick anymore. But
I used to be one of those Americans who would make fun of the Germans, like, oh, I need a scarf because I'm going to get sick because of the AC. And
we're not
like,
used to it.
I used to think, like, you guys are just being babies, like, come on, you're not going to get sick because of the AC. Then I lived in Germany for a couple months, and I came back, and what happened when I came back?
Sick?
I got sick.
Oh my God. I didn't even know that.
Yeah. So I'm now a believer in the fact that AC can make you sick. But
okay, good. Because I thought you were like on the other team, and I had to convince you now in a battle.
As my description says, I'm one of the most Germanized Americans you will meet. But,
yeah. So Americans just overdo it with the AC. If you live with other people, then you better hope that those people are on the same page as you, because I've lived with people who like it really, really cold, and then that's why I don't always love central AC, because you can not individualize it from room to room, and then like if the one person likes it really cold, you're just gonna be cold all the time.
Oh yeah, my parents, for example, love to keep their house super cold, so I always have to have a blanket or bring a sweatshirt in the middle of summer. But it is kind of cozy though, I have to say. I grew up that way.
I personally don't love it. I remember the first summer that I was here, I was studying in my room, and I was living with Americans, and I think over time I've gotten used to it a little bit more, but in the beginning I was very sensitive to it, so I was sitting in my room with a scarf in August, and it was like 95 degrees outside,
and then it turns
hot.
into the battle of the thermostat.
And then I'm sitting inside with my scarf and having a cold.
Oh man.
Yeah, so that's a pretty big thing. Another thing are light switches. I don't think we have to elaborate on that. Light switches are usually
slightly
just
different. For those of you watching YouTube, we'll put a picture of the two different light switches. But essentially, in Germany, you have a square that's probably about the size of your palm.
Yeah.
And you press the top or the bottom, and that it's like on a swivel, not a swivel, but it's tilting. It tilts top or bottom, on or off. In the U.S., it's more of an actual like switch, which is very, very small. It's oftentimes thinner than the width of your finger, and you flip it up to turn it on and flip it down to turn it off, and sometimes it gets messed up which does which depending on how many switches there are on a circuit. But now I'm getting too technical.
So you're good at describing now. That's you probably just painted a really nice word picture.
That's my goal. That's my goal. I've with the coronavirus and having to do all of this virtual work, I've tried to get better at describing things with words, because I can't necessarily use pictures to show people what I'm talking about.
Gestures.
Yeah, okay,
so light switches are different too. Oh, going back to the AC thing, there was one other thing that I wanted to mention. Americans are not only obsessed with cold air, but also with air circulation. So like air always moving, which is when Germans would probably say that as zieht. And so in most rooms, or not most rooms, but many rooms like bedrooms and living rooms in American places, you'll find a ceiling fan, which is not a thing in Germany. So Ventilatoren an der Decke. And Americans love to have those on as well.
And I'm one of those culprits. I leave my fan on all the time.
Yeah, and like Americans love sleeping with the fan on and stuff like that. Even in the winter, it doesn't even matter.
Yeah, for me, it's not even a thing about actually having the air circulation. It's just the sound.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So
the sound is soothing. Yeah, it's just to have some white noise in the background.
Yeah, so that's another thing. Fans are also going to be everywhere, which Germans will think you only need one or the other. Nope, Americans need both. Then floors are different to a certain extent. So in Germany, traditionally, I'd say that it's most common to have some kind of wooden floors or tiles in most places throughout the house, especially like kitchen traditionally has tiles.
Yeah.
And then Germans prefer hardwood floors, but the German hardwood floors
different.
are different than American hardwood floors.
And I don't know the best way to describe the difference, but
what are they? What's it called again?
Are you talking about parquet?
Parquets? What's it called? in
It's
English?
almost like cork.
Because no,
Well,
it's
not
not.
quite.
No, it's not.
I don't know how would you
Because
describe
I think
parquet
I
board?
mentioned it in my video. Is it just? It's similar. I think it's parquet. Is it parquet?
I don't know.
Something like that?
It's probably a French word, so I don't know how to pronounce it.
Oh well, we'll put a picture in the YouTube thing.
Yeah.
If you're just listening, maybe you can just Google it very quick. But usually, like, they have a different structure. I'm pretty sure it's made out of different wood,
Mm-hmm.
and it's usually light wood or light colored.
Like a
light color.
Yeah, like a light brown wood,
Yeah.
as opposed to a dark brown.
Exactly, and in the U.S., it's usually more dark brown colors.
Yeah, I mean, you can choose in the U.S., but I would say in general, when it comes
I
to
don't
wood,
think I've
when it
seen-
comes to wood finishings in homes, they tend to be a darker wood
Yeah.
compared to Germany.
And a different structure of the wood. You can just tell that it's a
Mm-hmm.
different kind of wood, and that
And
is
I
very
just was thinking all of these small little differences it makes it very clear for me in pictures. Like if I look at a picture,
Yeah.
I can tell if it.
you just know.
You just know, and it's hard to describe. So I'm glad that we're taking the moment to really describe these small differences, because people have been surprised when I've looked at a picture and been like, oh, that was obviously taken in Europe, or oh, that's in the U.S. And like, how do you know? Well,
Yeah, you
these
can
are
just
all of the
tell.
small little differences that make a big, quote unquote, big difference.
Yeah, I
in
think
the
it
end.
just comes from seeing different homes and then,
Yeah.
associating it with that. But in Germany, most people love their Parkettboden, light color. As I said, most wood in German homes tends to be, I'm not sure, I'm not familiar with the current like trends or whatever,
Yeah.
but most homes tend to
Neither
have
of
like
us are
light
homeowners.
wood with doors and door frames and whatever other wood you have, or like even furniture. Germans tend to prefer light colored wood, and Germans don't love carpet floor.
Yeah, that was one thing that I don't think I really realized until someone pointed it out to me. But in the
think I
U.S.,
did.
yeah, but in the U.S., it's almost standard to have carpet in the majority of your house.
Yeah, and even like the very, very new modern houses, whereas like in Germany, people will think, ooh, that's like old, gross
Yeah.
carpet floor. Like, no, Americans like to put that in their
Oh,
very
yeah.
new homes too.
Yeah,
and I love it.
Yeah, we find it to be very comfortable, which I think it's interesting, and we'll talk about this when we get into the habits too, but just how dirty they can get, carpets.
Yeah, I mean, you shouldn't think about it, but
Yeah, but here in the U.S., we tend to have carpets in most
Yeah.
most rooms of the home, with the exception of like the kitchen, oftentimes, and
The entrance area,
The entrance
I would say.
area, kind
Sometimes
of
the living
high
room.
traffic areas where you're normally tracking a lot of dirt through tend to be hardwood, but the actual spaces where you'll sit down and spend time tend to be carpeted.
yeah, which I love, but I know that I'm definitely in the minority
Yeah.
compared to all other Germans.
Yeah.
Like most Germans don't like that
And
at
for
all.
me as an American in Germany, it just doesn't seem very, very comforting, or not comforting, but comfy. Like
Yeah.
it just,
Homey.
it doesn't feel homey.
Yeah.
Everything is cold
Yeah.
and stark, and
I agree.
I don't. That's one thing in general, I like hardwood, but I like the coziness that carpet brings to
Yeah.
a space.
I agree. I know many listeners are going to disagree, but yeah, that there is a pretty big difference there. So the next part, I guess, is then moving into the kitchen. So there are just a few differences that you'll probably notice right away. The fridge is going to be a lot bigger in
Oh
the
my
US.
gosh. I remember, so when I did my internship in Erfurt, that was my first time in Germany,
Mm-hmm.
right? Well, long stay in Germany. And I get there into my apartment, and there are three of us sharing this space.
Mm-hmm.
And it is the smallest fridge I've ever seen.
It's probably just a normal
It was-
size fridge for Germans.
No, it was a mini fridge.
Oh, really?
Well, for me, it was a mini fridge. For them, it was... I mean, it was still a relatively small fridge for Germans, but still, there were three of us, and we were supposed to share this. And like the freezer was just this tiny little thing
Yeah.
that you could maybe fit like 2 chicken breasts in.
Yeah, I would say that's not super uncommon,
Yeah.
especially in like shared flats.
So
Yeah.
the first thing I did then after I saw that was I I texted my mom and said, "Will you send me a picture of our fridge so I can show my roommates?"
Yeah, but your fridge is huge. I mean, you have like the typical suburban place American
So
fridge.
yeah, German fridges tend to be very small. There isn't a lot of dedicated freezer space, and I would say in general Germans tend to go shopping more often,
Yes.
whereas Americans will go maybe once a week and load up on
Yeah,
everything.
Americans like to bulk up, and that's also
Yeah.
why in the stores you'll find all these huge sizes, like the 1 gallon. What's
Milk?
it called? Yeah, but I was gonna say a carton, but it's not a carton; it's a container.
I
Me and my
yeah,
words.
Yeah, a gallon of milk. Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Do you know in Canada they sell milk in bags?
I think someone commented
Isn't that
that.
weird? Sorry,
I've
Canadians.
been to
Nothing
Canada,
against it.
but
It's
I
just
don't
an
remember
interesting-
that.
And I think it's only in certain parts of Canada,
Okay,
but I'm
maybe
not
I
sure.
just didn't
Let us
pay
know,
attention
Canadians.
to it.
But yeah, so German fridges are very small, and American fridges tend to be very large in comparison, where there's a large portion dedicated for freezer, and then newer fridges, you'll often have 2 doors that you can open, or
Yeah.
just 1 door.
Sometimes one of the doors is entirely the freezer, and then the other door is the fridge. You know
Yeah,
those?
exactly.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. And maybe, I'm trying to think back into my German experiences. Is it common in Germany to have a dedicated freezer? Because I know,
Yes.
what I mean is, after we got rid of the mini fridge, we actually, in the Sperrmühle, we found a decent fridge.
Okay.
So then we went and picked that up. But inside of the refrigerator then was the freezer. So you would open the 1 door, and then there would be a smaller freezer dedicated.
You'll have that, but then like most families that I know have a dedicated
Okay.
freezer. Yes. So usually it's like underneath the
Yep.
fridge, or it's an extra device even.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then a lot of American fridges have the ice dispenser and the water dispenser on the
Yes.
outside, which is super cool. Like as a kid, I always wanted, my family, we actually had one of those growing
Ooh,
up,
getting
and then we got
fancy.
rid of it, and then I always missed it because it's so cool as a kid to just like, go there with your glass, and then you can just push the little thing and water comes out, or ice cubes come out, or crushed ice comes out. It's so cool.
Yeah, I love that as a kid too.
But Americans do that because they're obsessed with ice,
Exactly.
and they can't live without
we always
it.
have to have so much ice in all of our drinks. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's one. The fridges are different.
Then the stoves are different.
And the stoves are different. Maybe you can talk a bit about the difference of the stoves, because the stovetop, I grew up with an electric stovetop, so it's just like a hot plate that then turns bright red.
Which is very common in Germany, but what is very, very common in the US to this day, and I feel like even in new homes, I've seen it mostly even.
Is a gas stove.
Is gas stoves. I think I've only had one other stove in the US so far, and it also wasn't an electric stove, or I'm not even sure what it's called, but like a coil thing. Is it just called a coil?
It's kind of like a
stove?
hot plate?
Yeah, but it had like, it wasn't just a plate, it has
No, that's
like
what I was talking about.
Oh,
So
that's what you meant.
So yeah, essentially it's a piece of metal that wraps around in like a spiral, and it gets red hot.
Okay.
As opposed to what you were thinking while I was describing, which is essentially you just have a flat surface that the actual circle gets hot. We'll put pictures in the YouTube video too, just so we don't have to hurt our brains while describing these.
Yeah, but basically what surprised me a lot, and kind of does to this day, is that gas stoves are the most common stoves in my experience in the US, whereas in Germany you'll only find gas stoves in very, very, very old homes. And in that case, like, people will think it's really dangerous. Because
Interesting.
honestly kind of is.
Yeah.
Or you'll find it maybe with like, passionate cooks that need the gas stove because they think otherwise they can't make any good food. But I think my grandma had a gas stove, and that's the only person I've ever seen a gas stove.
Yeah, I would
have in
definitely say in the
Germany.
US that having a gas stove, especially if it's a nicer gas stove, I think there's kind of a history to stoves in the US. This is just me guessing at this point, so don't hold me to this as fact. But I feel like back in the day it was more common to have a gas stove. Then there was a transition to more electric stoves. And now like what's on vogue is to have a gas stove again. It's like the fancy thing, and like you said, if you like to cook, you can control the temperature better. And I think that's kind of like been a more recent thing, and like maybe like the last decade and a half is
which is very interesting, because in Germany the trend has never gone back to gas stoves. I mean, I'm not talking about like the cooking scenes in particular, just like regular families. But what has been the trend is induction stoves, where you can also control the temperature in an amazing way. But it's a lot safer and a lot more practical also to clean than gas stoves.
I think those exist here in the US too. I just haven't seen them too much.
Yeah, see, I've never seen one in the US, I don't think. I mean, and I have been to modern places, but as I said, like most newer places
Have
had
a
like a
gas
very
stove.
fancy, nice looking gas stove.
People like to have those industrial or fancy looking gas stoves as to show.
And even then the older places that I've mostly lived in always also had a gas stove. So depending on whether you're rich or poor or fancy or old-fashioned, gas stoves are everywhere in the U.S.
So talking a little bit more about some of the differences as well, like we said, in Germany, you tend not to have an ice dispenser in your fridge. And something that was interesting for me, and I still don't completely understand it because it makes life a lot more difficult, is the fact that there tend not to be garbage disposals in Germany. Or there aren't?
No, I've never seen one in Germany.
Neither have I.
Also pretty sure that, now I'm not sure, I'm so bad with remembering facts, but I've talked about it several times in my videos, and I think people have commented that they're illegal in Germany.
Interesting.
I'm not 100% sure, but I'm like 90%
But I could see why
sure.
that would make sense, because you want to put your Biomüll in the biodegradable what do you say Biomüll in English?
I don't know. We don't have that here because people don't really separate their trash.
Organic waste.
Organic waste.
Yes, there we go.
Yeah. No, I've heard that garbage disposals aren't very good for the sewage because it's hard to separate things
Makes
afterwards. But I personally love to have it in the US because it's just nice whenever your drain is clogged up, you can just turn the garbage disposal on, which I think Germans probably have seen those in movies, especially in connection with like some kind of risky, dangerous situations where someone puts their hand in or something. So there's basically...
Is it
Häcksler? Is Häcksler an English word? No, I think it's a German word.
So.
A shredder.
There you go.
It's like Häcksler is some kind of word. No, that's the German word. So there's a shredder down
inside of it.
In
and I was
sink.
just gonna say, I think that's one of the scariest things is to put like if you have to get like if a spoon or something falls down into it, you have to make sure that no one's around. You have to make sure that the switch is off. And then you put your hand down into it, and it's just like a high-risk situation.
It's like the adrenaline is pumping to your head. You're like, oh my God.
Yeah, is get in, get out, and be done with it.
Yeah, no, I've done that before in the US too. And I was like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Is it turned off? No, I mean, those are super practical, but apparently there's also some downsides to them that I guess you don't really realize as just the consumer person. But I'm sure there's reasons. I'm sure there's reasons why we don't have them in Germany.
Another thing that I hadn't seen before going to Germany, and it could just be my upbringing, but I feel like it's electric kettles are not really a thing in the US.
So Wasserkocher.
So Wasserkocher. People in the US, if they're going to heat up water, in my experience, either heat it up in the microwave or they have a old-fashioned kettle that you put on an actual stove to heat up the water.
Yeah, which many Germans have too, but the electric kettles are super, super common.
Exactly, and I hadn't seen that before going to Germany, and like I said, it maybe just was my upbringing, but I think that's actually a really cool thing. I didn't know they existed, and now I have one. Yeah. And it's really convenient for when I make my coffee. I don't have to... Yeah, it just goes really quickly.
People like to have them like at the office or something where they don't have an actual kitchen or, dorm rooms, those kind of places. It's where they're really practical.
Exactly. So that's another small difference. Another difference that I've noticed is kind of coffee and how people kind of prepare their coffee. Obviously, like a filter coffee or just your normal pot of coffee is common in both countries. Yes. But in my experience, I've seen quite a few German homes and office spaces where they have very complex coffee machines that will it'll grind the beans for you.
Yeah,
and
Vollautomat.
Exactly. It does everything for you. You can make different types, like a cappuccino. You put the milk in the machine. It does everything for you. And I hadn't seen that in an American home in my experience.
Yeah,
so that was something that surprised me.
I think Germans can be very fancy with their coffee, and I'm personally not a coffee drinker, so I don't have a lot of experience with this, but I know that my parents have an espresso machine, for example, and some of my friends have like one of those Vollautomaten, and I think many Germans are just very into quality coffee, so they don't like to have the K-cups, the capsules, which are pretty common in the US,
Very
I'd say.
common in the US.
Germans also don't really love them because they're very wasteful.
At my work, we get free K-cups.
But yeah, instead, Germans love having like the high quality, expensive coffee beans.
Which I have to say in the US, there's definitely a huge coffee scene. Like people love their cafes and like people put a lot of value into high quality coffee. But I would say in general, the coffee drinking public in general tends to be okay with just kind of mediocre coffee in the US. That's more of the standard.
Maybe coffee drinkers among you, especially the Germans, can leave a comment below on the YouTube video or maybe on Instagram or something. Let us know what your experiences are, because as I said, I'm not personally a coffee drinker, and I never even noticed this difference. Yeah. So that's very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I drink coffee every day, probably a little too much. And I always just use a French press because it's quick and easy.
I know those are common in Germany too.
But I know a lot of Americans who don't know what a French press is.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so that's just, there's small differences there.
Yeah. Okay, from the kitchen, moving on to the living room.
Yes, the living
So
room.
just a few more. I mean, we really kind of need to speed it up just a little bit. So some differences that this is one that you mentioned is the TV. So not in every German home, but in a lot of German homes, you'll find something like a TV cabinet kind of. So instead of just having a TV stand where the TV is on, many German homes like to have some kind of cabinet where the TV is like built into, and sometimes even with doors, so you can
and I
kind
think
of
that was
hide the
that's
TV.
what I was gonna say is, and maybe this is just my sample size isn't large enough to make an actual judgment on this, but in my experience in the US, the TV tends to be kind of the center of the room,
Right.
and I haven't seen many TV cabinets in which you're able to completely shut up, like hide the TV. And it's very common in the US to have a TV cabinet as well, not just a TV stand.
Okay, yeah.
But with the doors where you can really hide it off or hide it away, I think is more common in Germany than it is in the US.
Fernsehschrank.
Yeah, exactly. But in general, living rooms tend to be pretty common pretty similar besides the fact that you
I
can
mean,
have hardwood.
in many
hardwood
German
instead of
living rooms,
carpet.
the TV is also the center of the living room. Most American living rooms have a fireplace, and I would say it's most, at least in my experiences, especially those suburban homes.
Yes.
They all have a fireplace, but even older homes usually have a fireplace. Some apartments even have fireplaces. They're not always active. Or I'm not sure, maybe they're...
No, I would agree with that.
Not, maybe in most cases they're not. I'm not sure
They're
what
probably,
the
they're probably just shut off.
are.
Probably wouldn't be safe to use a lot of those old fireplaces. They would have to clean them out.
Yeah, but they're very, very common. I mean, it also
Very
kind of
common.
makes sense. Like, to me, I was always like, how do Americans keep up the whole Santa story with, like, because he comes through the through the chimney, right? Through the fireplace. And in German homes, fireplaces are not very common. I happen to have one at my house in Germany, but I don't know a whole lot of other families who have one, and especially in apartments. I don't think I've ever seen one in an apartment. I mean, I'm sure like some fancy apartments will build one in because they like the aesthetic of it, but it's not a standard thing to have.
Yeah, I would say in almost all single family suburban homes you will find a fireplace in the US.
So that's a big difference too, and like many people then also have the TV on top of the fireplace. This is something that I see a lot.
Yeah.
So the fireplace and the TV are kind of both the center of the living room.
Exactly.
Yeah, and then
should we jump to the bedroom real quick to talk about just some of the differences?
Because I think that's all about the living rooms. Yeah, bedrooms. I mean, there is a lot there. The first thing is closets.
Yeah.
American bedrooms, at least like in those rooms within a home or apartment that are dedicated bedrooms.
They have built-in closets.
They have built-in closets, which to Germans is a foreign concept because it's kind of like, it's a door. It looks like a regular room door, and you open it and there's some kind of space inside the wall with shelves.
That's
and
so
with,
funny to hear you describe it like that.
with a well, how do you...
There's a shelf.
A clothing...
Oftentimes there's like a rail where you can hang your clothes on.
Yeah, eine Kleiderstange. I don't know. Why is it such a complicated word in
like
English?
a bar, if you will.
Yeah, so you have like the whole like Innenleben, so what the closet or the wardrobe looks like inside, it's already built in.
Yeah.
Which means that you can't individualize it a lot.
No.
But you also don't have to worry about buying a wardrobe. Whereas in Germany, we don't have built-in closets.
I hadn't thought about this in detail, but there are also different types of closets in the US too. You have like your smaller closet, which is just a door where maybe you'll have like, I don't know, let's say a square meter and a half, where you can hang stuff up and there's normally a shelf on top.
Yeah.
Then also you'll have the longer closets where there's a sliding door.
Yeah.
Where you have probably, I don't know, meter depth, and then...
Yeah, I've had one of those too, and then it usually goes like over the length of the entire wall, pretty much.
Yeah, or like two or three doors next to each other, and then the walk-in closet, which is
obviously like luxury.
which is the king of all closets.
Yeah, but since Americans have a lot of space, there's actually more people than you would expect that have walk-in closets.
Yeah. Oh,
because to
certainly.
a German, that's like, wow, that's goals for, when you're rich, but no, Americans have that. I think your parents have that, right?
Yeah, I think, they do. Yeah, they do. They
and you guys are not like rich.
No, and but they live in a nice home, and
I'm not trying to like talk them down or anything.
No. But what I'm
like,
just saying is that each room has a walk-in closet.
Yeah.
Each bedroom has a walk-in closet.
Yeah.
Some of the closets are bigger than others, but I would say in most standard American middle-class homes, you'll have a decent-sized closet in every bedroom.
See, in German, we don't even call that closet anymore. I mean, we usually we don't have the word closet anyways.
Yeah.
We just have the word Schrank,
So
which
that
is a wardrobe.
Exactly.
But we would not even call that Schrank anymore because it's not.
Yeah.
We would call that Ankleidezimmer, so like dressing room or something
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah, so for the Americans listening or the non-Germans, non-Europeans, whatever, who knows what it's like in your country, but in Germany you tend to have a what we call, I guess in English, a wardrobe, which is just, it sounds weird coming out of an American mouth because we don't really tend to have them.
And you don't really use that word ever.
When I hear wardrobe, I think of Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
The what?
It's a book.
Oh, okay.
But it's for me, it's like fantasy or like fancy British.
Yeah. Does a wardrobe also just stand for your variety of clothing that you own?
Yeah, that's what I would. Exactly. That's what we tend to associate with the word wardrobe.
Yeah.
But yeah, in Germany, you tend to have a standalone piece of furniture
that you usually have to buy yourself. It does not come with the place.
Exactly.
With the house or apartment.
There are normally some drawers, a couple drawers in the bottom, maybe on the side, and then if you open it up, maybe there are some shelves, and like Feli was saying, the
clothing rack or whatever it's called.
Rack, the bar where you can actually hang your clothes.
Yeah, and in a lot of cases, people built them themselves, like IKEA. Wardrobes are very popular, so people will just customize those to their needs, which is something that you don't really get to do a lot in the US. So depending on what you prefer, I guess like either the German or the American version is better. I really like the American way of doing it because you don't have another piece of furniture in your room.
Yeah, it doesn't take up as much.
Yeah.
It does take up as much space, but that space that it takes is more hidden.
Yeah, like in American bedrooms, it's just somewhere in the wall, and you can close the door. Yeah, and it's just gone. And I mean, of course, you can close your wardrobe doors too, but I just like the way that it's just very
tucked
clean
away.
feeling.
Yeah, exactly, less cluttered. Another thing that's somewhat different is the mattresses in Germany.
Well, beds in general. Everything about beds, honestly.
You could do an entire episode about
I think we should.
But
maybe.
Yeah. But just a quick difference. Oftentimes, the bedding is different. In my experience in Germany, that you have a fitted sheet, and then oftentimes just your duvet with a duvet cover.
Always, a duvet
is like
sheets.
a comforter. If you don't know what a duvet is.
Yeah, you won't find sheets in Laken in German. So also what you find in like other Southern European countries. So in Spain, Italy, Greece, you will find that. In Germany, no, you'll have your comforter and then a duvet that it's in. Or duvet cover. You have your duvet and then your duvet cover.
Yeah, which some Americans don't even know what a duvet is, because then we have comforters which are like a duvet, but you don't change the top, like the actual cloth ever.
Yeah, so we usually wash the duvet cover like, once a month or every 2 weeks or so.
And the reason why in the US that you can get away with having a comforter that you don't have to wash the cloth is because it's very common to have a couple sheets between you and that duvet or the comforter.
Yeah.
So in the US you tend to have a fitted sheet, then you would have just your regular top sheet, and then in the winter oftentimes people will put a blanket on there, and then you have your comforter.
Yeah.
That's the way that I was always brought up.
Yeah, and many Germans hate that. Like, I personally don't like it. I don't understand why people would prefer to have that. I mean, I kind of understand that in the summer, if it's really hot, you prefer to just have your sheets and nothing on top of that. But if you want to have your comforter on top of that, I would always prefer a duvet cover rather than the sheets, because it just tends to fall apart all the time. But besides that,
it's easier to make your bed with a German bed as opposed to an
I mean, I
American
think all
setup.
Germans prefer the German way of doing it. Besides that, the beds also have different sizes, so that's a thing. And then usually with the bigger sizes, I mean, you also have big beds. In Germany, they're just a different measurement. But Germans tend to put two mattresses, two like twin-sized mattresses into their big beds. Whereas in the US, it's very common to only have one big mattress and also one big blanket, sheets, comforter, whatever it is. Whereas in Germany, with the two mattresses, also usually come two different blankets for each person.
I just was thinking, if you were to do, let's say in Germany you have two mattresses, right? So then if you were to make a German bed with two mattresses the same way that you would make an American bed, that would be a lot of sheets that you would have to deal with.
Oh my God. It would be such a mess.
So I think that we'll kind of skip over some of the other smaller differences that there are in bedrooms just for time's sake. But maybe should we go ahead and jump on to household habits, or did you have
Yeah,
any
I guess
physical
let's
differences?
just mention the things that we haven't mentioned. Bathrooms, we're not going to get into detail because we've talked about bathrooms a lot in
Ad
the
nauseam.
second and the first episode, and we'll probably dedicate a whole episode just to bathrooms in the future. So bathrooms have a lot of differences, but just, go back to the first episode for that. And then basements can be very different. A lot of American homes have finished basements,
Yeah.
so like Hobbykeller kind of.
Yep.
Whereas in
Kind of
Germany,
like a man cave oftentimes.
and that's very, very common for like suburban houses and stuff
Very.
like that. Whereas in Germany, that some people have that, but it's not the standard at all.
Yeah, I haven't seen many of those in Germany.
Yeah. Okay, and so with that, we're done with our house tour. Woohoo!
Which we said that we were going to go through quickly, but that was not quickly
didn't.
at all.
We did not do that, but oh well. So now we'll
So
come
if you're
to
still with us,
in that case, thank you for sticking with us. And now we will come to the main part of the episode, or not the main part, but I think it's
Part
a
two.
little bit more interesting, the household habits that are different. And I mean, this really probably isn't going to throw you off if you just travel to Germany or the US, but
Yeah.
if you stay with a family or friends, or
Or
if
even
you're
just
dating
visit.
someone, then you'll notice these differences, and it's probably good to be aware of them.
so maybe we should start back out in the front yard and walk this. We made it through the door again, and we're back in the foyer.
in a Diele.
And oftentimes, and this threw me off the first time I was in a German home and this happened to me, they offered me shoes.
Yeah, house shoes.
House shoes.
Yeah.
So I show up and I have my normal shoes on, and in most American homes, you just leave your shoes on.
Yeah, or you take them
Or you
off
can
and just
take them
walk
off.
around in your socks
Exactly.
or barefoot. But it's not super rude or uncommon to walk through the house in your street shoes in the U.S.
Yeah,
and in
no.
Germany, that is a big no-go.
Yeah.
You do not leave your shoes on, your street shoes, unless you ask and the host says it's okay.
Which is something that I always do is I just ask the host right away, should I take my shoes off, leave them on? And normally they say either you can leave them on or take them off.
In the U.S., you mean?
No,
or
in Germany I do that, yeah. I mean, most of the time, I would say I take them off.
Yeah.
But this time, and it's very common, people will offer you house shoes.
Mm-hmm.
So like slippers that they just have sitting there for guests.
Yeah.
Specifically for whoever may come to their home, they have an extra pair of slippers for you.
Yeah.
And I thought it was the weirdest thing.
It is. I mean, part of this is, Germans not only have guest slippers, Germans usually, most of them do wear slippers themselves.
Yeah.
So that's a big difference itself, that Germans like to go into the house, take their street shoes off. I always say street shoes, regular shoes off,
Yeah.
and then switch into their house shoes.
Which oftentimes in my experience tend to be like Birkenstocks or
Yeah.
some sort of sandal or an actual slipper that's like soft and cozy like
Yeah.
you have in the US in the winter in my experience.
Exactly. I personally, I guess with a lot of these things that we're mentioning about houses, I've always, without even knowing it, I've always been somewhat Americanized without even ever being to the US. And even though my parents are very German with all of these things, they have the two different mattresses, they all wear house shoes, but I never liked house shoes. When I got my first big bed, I did not want two different mattresses.
Interesting.
So I've always been like American.
You're an American
with,
at heart.
Yeah, with a lot of those things. So I've personally never, whenever I had the choice, like as a kid, I was forced to have house shoes, but when
Yeah.
I was an adult, I didn't choose to have them, but most Germans do have house shoes, and then like they offer them to their guests. Or a funny thing is, as a kid, or I think
I was
even
gonna
some adults
say-
do that, you bring your own house
Yeah.
shoes to your friends or whatever place. Like if you're invited somewhere, like as a kid, I would do that. I would bring my own house shoes with me to my friend's
Which
place.
is such a foreign concept for
Like in your
Americans.
little backpack,
That's
and then
so
you get
weird.
there and you switch your shoes.
Anderes Land, andere Sitten.
Yeah, you can just tell that Germans are pretty big on
Cleanliness
Yeah.
and order and
hygiene and
Yeah.
whatever. Yeah.
yeah, so that's a big difference. You were even saying in kindergarten,
Yes, and elementary
in
school
elementary
too.
school, you had to wear
Yep. House shoes.
in the classroom.
So yeah, like kindergarten. I think for that it makes even a little bit more sense even to Americans hearing this, because kids are just messy.
Yeah.
They go outside and play in the mud or whatever. But even in elementary school up until 4th grade, in my case, I'm not sure if it's maybe even going further in other schools, but we had cabinets or closets or wardrobes. What's the word I'm looking for?
Probably a cubby. Do you know? Have you heard the
No,
word cubby?
but that's not what it was.
okay.
It was like a regular, like with doors,
Oh yeah, with
and we
doors.
could even lock them.
Oh okay.
So I guess wardrobes. outside the classroom, and every kid would have their own schoolhouse shoes. So I had my home house shoes, and then I had my schoolhouse shoes that stayed at school. And in the morning when I came to school, I would switch my shoes to my house shoes, put my regular shoes into the cabinet, and then we actually had keys to lock them so nobody could steal your shoes or whatever. And then for breaks and recess, you switch back into the other shoes. So like 3 times a day or so, you have to switch back and forth.
Crazy. For all of you Germans out there wondering how we do things in the U.S., we're normal people, and we just either have our shoes on or don't.
Well,
there's nothing, no special pair of shoes that we keep for guests. And I think it's weird too that like I'm sharing shoes with all of the people that have come to your
honestly,
house.
I agree disgusting. With that. As a German, I never liked that concept either, and I never really understood it because like on the one hand, Germans are so big on like the hygiene part, but then you want to have other people share shoes with others. I know that some of these guest slippers are like very simple slippers, and some of them can be washed, and I know people who like do wash them actually. Just like how you wash like guest bedding or whatever. Yeah.
Well, I will say I'm a very Germanized American, but that is one habit that I will never pick up.
I agree. I won't either. My parents don't do that. I mean, they have their own house shoes. They do not have house shoes for their guests, but I also think that sometimes guests don't like that. I think sometimes guests would appreciate it if there were house shoes, because then like Germans don't like to have cold feet, and not in the metaphorical sense, but in the actual literal sense, because you know Germans are kind of sensitive.
Remember, like I said, they'll get sick.
Exactly.
Oh my gosh, what do they do in the U.S.? There's air conditioning and they don't get offered house shoes, slippers. But, I mean, what are they going to do? No wonder they get sick so easily.
Overall, though, you can just tell that Germans like to have different things for different purposes.
I would say Germans are very particular. Yeah. Just to sum it all up, is Germans are very particular.
Yeah. So the whole house shoe thing, if you're visiting Germans, you now have been warned.
Don't be surprised when they offer you a pair of shoes that is just sitting there.
Yeah. So I guess the next thing, and that leads us back to the very beginning.
Exactly what brought us to
laundry.
this topic. So laundry is done in Germany kind of obviously not too different, but
a lot of it is
there are
different.
a lot of small differences between the way that you do laundry in Germany and in the U.S. In the U.S., it's very common to have both a washer and a dryer, and people always use both. Yeah. So oftentimes in the U.S., the washers are different than in Germany. And it's been changing.
Both appliances are actually different than in Germany.
I haven't had too much experience with German dryers, so I can't speak to that. But
just a little summary. I think German washers are better than American washers, and I now even know it from my own experience.
Efficient.
German dryers are worse than American dryers.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, but essentially, I'll speak about the washer that I grew up with, which I think is pretty standard. But it's a top-load washer, as opposed to in Germany where you would have a front-load washer.
Usually. Of course, the washers are different, but this is the
I would say the average, the norm, yeah. And in these top-load washers, there's a center, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not an auger, it's an agitator thing. That it's just like a column that stands up in the middle of it, and then you put your clothes around it.
Yeah. We can show a picture in the YouTube video.
And you can just see me holding up my arm like as if it's the center of that. But normally there's like a slight like spiral around it, which then helps wring out the clothes and agitates the clothes to get the dirt out. And it'll fill up all the way with water. And oftentimes there's a soak cycle where then the clothes just sit there, which I'm sure happens in German washers as well. But because it's the top load, is different.
Yeah, it's different, and also the temperature settings are very different.
You're right.
Cannot set them to a specific temperature like you can in Germany. So in Germany we have the front loaders, and then you usually can set whatever, like from 30 degrees to like 90 degrees. You can set Celsius. You can set the specific temperature, and also from my experience, most German washers have more specific programs that you can run compared to American washers.
I said, Germans are particular.
We are. But also, as I said, those German front loaders, they're usually a lot more expensive, but in my opinion, they're also usually a lot better. Like, I have never been able to clean, especially like white socks or something like that, as well in the US as I am able to do that in Germany.
How long would you say your average washer takes?
It's a lot longer.
Yeah, I was going to say that's something
like definitely over an hour, or like I think the shortest programs are like maybe 50 minutes or an hour, but in the US it's usually you're through within like 20 minutes or half an hour maybe.
I wouldn't necessarily say that. I think it depends obviously on the washer.
I mean, I guess like my washer, it's usually like short. I mean, I've never even
The
measured
laundromat washers that I have to use because I live in an apartment right now are they take like 40 minutes.
Okay.
And the one at my parents' house, depending on the setting, takes close to an hour.
Yeah.
But for example, when I lived in Germany, the washer that I used there took much longer, like 2 hours.
Oh, wow. Okay, that's long.
But I think it was like an eco setting.
Yeah, I mean, also all washers were obviously different, but also in the US, and this was the thing when I first came here, like I had to Google how to wash my clothes and that because I had no idea how it worked. I just saw this thing. I saw my 3 different settings, like cold water, warm water, hot water, or maybe there was like 5 or so, but compared to the specifics in Germany,
There's
it was
like
very different.
Cold, cool, warm, and hot.
Yeah. And I know for some washers at least, the washer itself doesn't even heat the water up. It just takes the hottest that it gets out of the pipes.
Interesting.
I know it's different from washer to washer though.
I don't know those details.
In Germany, it definitely always heats it to the temperature that you set. But I also was confused where to put my detergent, my Waschmittel, because in German washers you usually have like a little drawer. I'm working on that word, drawer, where you put your detergent, and then you close it, and then the washer does the rest. In the US, you just put it in the drum, or what do you call it?
Yeah,
drum?
I think drum is the technical word in the space.
And also detergents
on top of the clothes.
In the US, since the washers work differently and not as well, in my opinion. Detergents are a lot stronger and have a lot more chemicals in the US than they do in Germany, and it's more common here to have the liquid detergents, whereas in Germany, I would say it's maybe 50-50, but I grew up with the powder more.
Interesting. Yeah, I definitely grew up with the liquid detergent.
Yeah.
I was going to ask, do you separate your whites and colors?
I used to do that for sure. Like, that's what you learn in Germany to do.
That's what we learn as well.
I'd also say since the German washers, again, I know I keep saying this, but since the German washers are better, in my experience, the risk is actually higher in Germany for something to go wrong.
Yeah.
Because also, like, if you wash it at a high temperature, like, it actually gets really hot, whereas in the US, I'm also not always very sure that it's really getting hot. But then in that case, like, colors do... What's the word? Abfärben. Fade, yeah, or like go on the other white clothes.
They can bleed onto the other clothes.
Bleed on?
I don't know if that's the actual way of saying it, but that's what came to my mind. So let me know.
No, I'm trusting the native speaker.
Don't trust me when it comes to that type of stuff.
Yeah, when I first came here, I found that most of my American roommates would just throw all of their laundry. Like, they have a lot of laundry, so they could separate it. It would make sense to separate it, but they still like throw everything together in the washer and then everything in the dryer, and they don't even take out the delicates to like air dry them.
My grandma has a fit when she watches me do laundry.
And so honestly, like, I've kind of over time tried that too, because as just a single household, like a single person, I found that separating things is not always the most efficient thing to do. So honestly, now I mostly wash things together and don't separate them anymore. Especially
when it comes to drying though, and maybe that's a good transition. We've talked a lot about the washer now. So once your clothes are done in the washer, in the US, like you said, people just take them out and chuck them into the
just
dryer.
The whole pile over to the dryer on, and then in an hour or two, their clothes are dry. Dry.
But in Germany, that's not the case oftentimes.
In Germany, we usually air dry our clothes.
Yeah. So that's what brought us to this episode. That was one habit that I picked up, partially because I just thought it was interesting and probably better for the clothes is what I would think.
Yeah.
But secondly, I'm a cheapskate and I didn't want to pay the $125 that I would have to pay for the dryer at the apartment complex laundromat.
Yeah.
So I just hang all my clothes now, or air dry them. And that's something that I picked up in Germany and I've kept with me.
Yeah. So most German like family homes, when they have like a little laundry room, they will have cords hung up where you can hang the clothes and then different drying racks all over. Most families do have a dryer as well, but we only use them for certain things like beddings or towels or something like that. And we don't usually, or maybe jeans or something like that, but we don't usually use them for all our regular clothes.
Yeah.
And now I forget what I was going to say something else. Oh, and then in apartments, or like smaller homes where younger people live, like you oftentimes don't even have a dryer.
Yeah.
Like if there's no shared dryer laundry system in the basement, then some people just have a washer in their apartment.
And I was
going to
say we should talk about where that washer is located.
Yeah, well, let me finish first.
Go ahead.
And then like you will find drying racks all over. Like
Yeah.
sometimes they're set up in the kitchen. Sometimes everyone has, or like in the bathroom, or everyone has one in their bedroom. And I actually, when I first came here, I mean, I wasn't really used to the whole dryer situation. And we're kind of taught in Germany to not trust the dryers all that much. Because you're scared that something's going to shrink. Which, I mean, that does happen.
I mean, we talk about that in the U.S. too.
Yeah,
things will shrink in the dryer.
And you want to like
obviously,
treat your clothes well or good. You want to treat them good?
with respect.
With respect. And the dryers don't really have a good reputation, I would say, in Germany. So in the beginning, I didn't have a drying rack, and I never got one here in the U.S. And I actually like got very Americanized. So I usually dry most of my clothes now, except for my delicates, so everything made out of wool and stuff. And what I do instead of having a drying rack, I just hang them all over my room. So like there's gonna be a hanger with something on the doorknob, on the curtain rack,
Wherever you can hang anything.
Yeah.
On that Stange.
What's Vorhangstange again? It's not rack.
What would we say? A curtain.
I know there's a word for it.
A curtain rod.
Yeah, thank you.
There you go.
I knew there was something.
Yep.
Yeah, on the curtain rod. So, or like on my lamp even. It's going to be all over the place.
Yeah.
But yeah, I have started to mostly dry my clothes in the dryer, which is not very environmentally friendly. So shame on me.
Well, I'm making it up for you. We're kind of... You've
Leaving
taken over the
things out.
American habit. I've taken over
Yeah,
the German
we're
habit.
evening it
So
out.
in the end, it's a wash.
Yeah, so where is the washer located, Josh?
Yeah, so I always, I mean, I didn't realize this. I think I maybe saw it in a couple like documentaries or something before I went to Germany. But the washer in the U.S. tends to be in its own space, or in the basement is often a very common place to put it in homes. But in Germany, it's not uncommon to have a washer in the kitchen.
Or in the bathroom.
Or in the
Both of
bathroom,
those.
exactly.
So I would say in like family homes, houses again, it is also very common to have your little laundry room oftentimes in the basement or something. But as I said, there's not a lot of space in Germany. So if you live in an apartment, you probably won't have your extra laundry room because there's just no space. So in that case, you have to put it somewhere where there's a water pipe. And that's either in the kitchen or in the bathroom.
I don't know, maybe you haven't been into these type of apartments in the U.S., but oftentimes in the U.S. there's not a washer in your unit because there's just shared washers and dryers in the basement.
Yeah, I mean,
like
that's the thing in Germany too. Sometimes people, even though they have a shared washer and dryer in the basement, they still prefer to have their own upstairs.
But what I was going to say,
Sorry.
no, you're fine. But what I was going to say was that oftentimes there's just a closet that there's a washer and dryer that are on top of each other in some apartments. But that's not as common in my experience, I'll say. But that's something that I haven't seen too much of in Germany. But
I don't
it could
think
just
I've
be
ever seen that in Germany.
that there's just a closet that simply holds those two. There's not space to do anything there, just space to hide away the washer and dryer.
Yeah, I think like I have seen the washer and dryer on top of each other, but then like in someone's bathroom or something like that, just to save space because there was no space to put two devices next to each other. Or like we even have these really, really small washers that are really just maybe this thick. So how much is that?
I don't know.
2 feet?
Yeah, I was going to say half a meter maybe.
30, 45 centimeter. I don't even know. I'm super bad with estimating. So maybe I'm totally off. But I know there's like really, really slim washers too for people that have really small kitchens.
I haven't seen those, but that would be funny. That would surprise me for sure. So maybe moving away from washers and dryers then, and you kind of hinted to this as well when we were talking about AC and ventilation in homes, but Lüften.
Lüften is a big topic.
It's a huge topic, especially now with Corona. The German government, well, I guess we should explain first of all what that is to people who don't speak German.
Ventilating.
Ventilating out a room, so airing out your room or airing out space. So opening up your window and letting all of the fresh air in, getting out the stale air, if you will.
Germans are obsessed with that.
Oh yeah, you'll walk in and say, "Oh, the air doesn't smell good. We need to open up the window."
Yeah, Germans love fresh air. That's also why Germans don't love the whole like AC thing, where Americans therefore don't tend to open their windows a lot because they get the ventilation through the air vents. But Germans will say that's old stinky air. You don't want that. You want the fresh air. And it also has a lot to do with German windows, because with German windows it also works very well.
Yeah. So German windows are definitely different than American windows. American windows, you just slide them up or slide them down. And there's almost always a screen that prevents any sort of bugs from getting in.
Yeah, Fliegengitter.
Exactly. Whereas in Germany, you have these very complex windows, which I just think are great.
Yeah.
First of all, it's not very common to have a screen in your window, in my experience in Germany.
Unless you install it yourself.
Yeah,
but in
it's
that
not
case,
a standard.
Yeah, in that case, it's like a permanent screen usually, because I always had them. But in the US, they're usually also, you can slide them up as well. So there's like your regular window, your glass that you can slide up, and then there's your screen that you can slide up and down. In Germany, if you decide to install one, it's just going to be taped to the wall or something.
Yeah, which doesn't look very aesthetically pleasing in my opinion. But in Germany, the window itself then has a handle, and if you turn so let's say the handle is sitting at 90 degrees parallel to the floor. If you turn the handle down so that it's then perpendicular to the floor,
I love the engineering descriptions.
The window is locked and you can't open it.
Yep.
If you have it at 90 degrees and pull on it, so it's parallel to the floor then, and you pull on it, the entire window will open on a hinge.
Like a door.
Like a door. It essentially opens as a door.
And that's really the thing that makes ventilating so easy, because with opening the whole window like that, air just comes in so much quicker and more easily, and it's just more air too. Like with American windows, the air just doesn't come in as well.
Yeah, no, I would 100% agree. Yeah. And then let's say you close the window again and you are going to turn the handle up so it's perpendicular to the floor again, but up. Then the window will tilt towards you if you pull on it. So essentially at the bottom of the window, there's a hinge then that holds the window in place, and then it just tilts towards you somewhat.
Yep.
And that just is to get some fresh air, but not in the amount that you were just describing, how the air just comes rushing in when you fully open the window.
Right.
So German windows are very different and very highly engineered compared to American windows.
Yeah, many Germans like to sleep with their window tilted, for example.
That's what I would do in Germany when I was there too, just to keep the fresh air.
Yeah, so that's a pretty big difference, just windows themselves and then the whole Lüften thing. Like, as you said, like with Corona, now like there have been so many guides sent out, because Lüften has always been a pretty big thing in German culture. Like people do it in their offices, in the classroom.
Yeah.
Like I remember
in the winter,
in schools, like in the classroom, it will always be all the girls freezing, sitting there in their winter coats, and then the teacher or the guys all saying, "Oh, can we open the window? We need to lüften," or "We need to lüften." We need to ventilate, and it would pretty much always be like a war on.
Oh yeah.
Do we open the window? Can we close it yet? But yeah, there have been many guides sent out now as to how to ventilate correctly to get all the viruses out.
I think I was actually just listening to NPR, and they had a story about this about Germany and their Lüften, their ventilation practices.
It does help a lot with the virus.
And how I think every 20 minutes now it's required that you open the windows for 5 minutes just to ventilate out the room. That way students can continue to go to school.
Yeah.
But that's a lot of opening and closing of the windows. And like we were saying, in the winter, it's not fun. I remember, like I said, I haven't lived in Germany in the winter, but I went over for a meeting in April when it was still cold. And we were sitting in a meeting room, and our boss just walks in and opens up all of the windows. And me and my American colleagues were like, what is going on? This is freezing. I didn't have a jacket with me. And it just becomes a war of who wants the window open, who wants it closed, and then people just don't say anything. They'll get up and go and close it, and then someone will come 3 minutes later and open it back up. And
it's this whole cycle too with like, you want to ventilate, but then also Germans will say es zieht, which means like, oh, there's air moving, pretty much. Like Germans don't, as we talked about before, Germans don't love it when there's some kind of air circulation, not unless it's super hot, but usually Germans don't love that. So then there's going to be the one person that wants to ventilate and the other person who says es zieht.
Yeah, exactly. It's just a back and forth.
Yeah. Okay, and I think that was the last one for today, because we have talked
a lot,
and we knew this was going to be a big topic. I mean, homes and houses are just a very big and central central, essential topic that you need to talk about. So again, let us know what you thought about this, if you like this, or if you want us to keep it short next time.
We got a little ahead of ourselves. Like we said, we were going to try to speed through the first part, but once we get talking about it, it's really hard to keep things short because we get excited. But
we had too many stories to share.
Yeah.
But I guess with that, we'll just wrap it up quickly. So those of you who are listening on a podcast platform right now, just for your information, you can also watch us on YouTube. It's Understanding Train Station. For those of you who are watching us on YouTube, you can also just listen to us when you're in the car or, on a jog, and listen to us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify. I think we're going to be on iHeartRadio soon. I think we're on Amazon Music. All the links.
Keep letting us know what platforms you guys want to make sure that we're on, because we're trying to adjust and make sure that we're on everything that you guys need/want. So on all of those platforms where you can give us a review, please make sure to leave us comments, leave us good reviews, and we also have an email, understandingtrainstation@gmail.com, if you want to reach out to us that way. But we really appreciate you guys spending these, I won't say few minutes with us, quite a few minutes with us.
Hours with us.
Yeah, pretty much. And keep giving us that feedback, and we will try to adjust as we move forward.
Yeah.
So
you can also support us on patreon.com and on buymeacoffee.com. If you want to become a patron, we'll record even a little extra snippets for you, which this week you probably won't even need that, because I'm sure you're satisfied now.
You've heard enough of us. Follow us on Instagram as well, Understanding Train Station. But yeah, there are plenty of ways to stay in contact with us and reach out. So.
And with that, we look forward to recording the next episode next week. You'll hear us every Thursday. So, macht's gut.
Servus.
Bye.
Bye. Oh, that was weird. Bye.